everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Hollo Talks podcast. I'm your host, Riley. Today, episode 1, we're going to be talking about the Cars universe and the Cars movies. As someone who's a big fan of all the Cars movies, I think that the fact that this movie, or not movie franchise, but honestly, franchise and trilogy, it's so highly disrespected in regards to, I guess, the quality of the movies. With at least, 9 total projects or movies and shows that are in the universe, obviously, you have the Cars 1, and then the Cars 2, Cars 3, then you have Planes 1, and you have Planes 2, and then you have the 2 TV series, Cars Tunes, which is the one starring Mater, which all take place, I'm assuming, sometime between Cars 1 and Cars 2, just judging by, obviously, just their releases, and they came out right between 2007 and 2010, so literally right smack dab when Cars 1 and Cars 2 came out. So, and then obviously, there's so many of those. I'd say probably 10 to 11, I think I counted. And they're all good. They're just like 3 to 4 minutes, nothing too crazy or too deep. They're just about Mater, and obviously, this movie franchise this is what it should have stuck to, and I think that the Cars tunes obviously did contribute a little bit to what happened with Cars 2. Then obviously after that, you have the Radiator Springs 500 short movie, which is around, I think, 10 minutes. I don't know. I've never seen it. When I was researching for this episode, I honestly didn't even realize that this was a thing within the universe. So, there's that. I had no idea this happened. And Owen Wilson, Larry the Cable Guy, all the original voice actors came back. It came out in 2014, so literally, I think, around 3 years after Cars 2 came out. And then obviously, Cars on the Road, which is the most recent edition, which came out around 5 years ago now, which is it's crazy to think, guys, that it's now 2026. Cars is now 20 years old. And honestly, as someone who's a big fan of the Cars series, and with this channel and this property getting, we're starting it up now, after planning for months and months, obviously, I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit what Hollo Stories is, what we want to do here on this channel, and as a, as a community. So, here at Hollo Stories, we are going to aim to create some really cool stop-motion movies or short films. Our first one, I'm proud to announce, is going to be called Bounty Hunter. It is a Star Wars-centered short film around, a bounty hunter. All I can say at this time is that the release date is, honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, it is unknown right now. Very unknown. Had some issues with the script and had some life events come up when writing it, so the release date is a little up in the air right now, probably around the next 3 to 4 months, I would say. But for the podcast side of things for the channel, I want to try and get out 1 to 2 episodes a week just talking about movies. I'm a big nerd, so I love Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar. That's going to be, Pixar, Star Wars, Marvel are going to be 3 things I talk about the most. I've seen all the Harry Potter movies. Maybe I'll do a Harry Potter episode. We'll see. These episodes take a long time to make. And obviously, we're trying to make Bounty Hunter, finishing the script up, getting everything done, which is going to be a full stop-motion movie. I can say it's going to be around 20 to 30 minutes of full-on dialogue, just using things around that I have. So, yeah, that's what Hollo Stories is, guys. All right, and back to business. So, what happened with the Cars universe? With, as I said, 9 total movies and episodes within the universe, the complete and utter failure of just world building is just remarkable, in my opinion. You have 5 movies and so many episodes of TV, and you're telling me that there's not a successful film franchise here. obviously it's one of multiple different Pixar movies to get not only get a sequel but get also like spin-offs made. Obviously the big gun at Toy Story is Toy Story. At Pixar is Toy Story, with a fifth movie coming out, which is absolutely nuts in my opinion. Which when I make the Pixar episode, don't get me wrong, I will 100% talk about that. Oh my gosh. So yeah, let's just get right into it here. So Cars 1, obviously 2006 release date, has a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes. Obviously, Lightning McQueen gets stuck in Radiator Springs. He's kind of a douchebag. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, but gets learned to just slow down, live life, live what he wants to do, whatever. And obviously, I'm only gonna talk about the movies, not just like the tune or Cars tunes, the shorts, the TV episodes, because those they're 3 to 4 minutes, completely almost kind of irrelevant. So I'm gonna talk about Cars 1 here. Cars 1 for me is one of those movies that I can watch over and over again. I mean, I am old. I'm old, and I still very much enjoy this. I guess this movie, this show, this thing that I've loved for years. Growing up, I always had a Lightning McQueen racing jacket. I had the Mickey Mouse ears. Because you get a Disneyland, and I've been to California Adventure where Cars Lane is, and I love it. I love it there. Obviously, I went this last year, flicked up with my boy Lightning McQueen. It was a great time, but I think that the Cars 1 was just so good, and I think it is very obviously overrated. I know a lot of people don't rate Cars 1 as high as other movies within Pixar, which is honestly completely understandable. There are better movies, but as someone who connected to Cars 1 and what Cars 1 was as a movie and as a universe, like, I had all the die casts, all the little toy cars growing up. I had cars in that, like, this is my big thing. This was my big thing growing up, is that I just loved the Cars movies. And so, this movie as a whole, getting to show someone like my little cousin this movie, who's now obsessed with the Cars movies, getting to show him, this movie, and I'm like, wow, I was his age, and when I was his age, like, I was doing the exact same thing. I was collecting the cars. I was telling stories. I used to make, die-cast reviews. I would do all these different things with these cars. And I think that it's just one of those things that I will defend this movie with my life, So, and then Cars 2 came around, which has a whopping 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. This is going to be the one I spend the most time on, obviously. I will go back and talk about Cars 1 a little bit more. I'll talk about all the movies, kind of just like a brief recap of each movie. But Cars 2 is just one of those movies that shouldn't have been made. It really, really should not have been made. And I think that the fact of the matter is that, they saw the success of the Cars Tunes show and short films, that they were like, oh, let's give Mater a whole movie, and let's make him a funny, buddy cop-ish take on a spy movie, and let's have obviously, you see those things on social media where it's just like, oh, Cars 1's about Lightning McQueen becoming humble, Cars 3 is about Lightning McQueen learning to slow down and not be Cars 3 is more of him slowing down, realizing, he's got to, pass the baton, not everything is racing, enjoy life. And Cars 2 is a plot about a international billionaire hiring a German scientist to create fuel or create an alternate fuel to power electric, or I think an alternate fuel to, overthrow that alternate renewable fuel, and for them to have more oil money that comes in. So, honestly, the whole thing of this is it's just so fucking complicated. you could go down, like, I mean, this should not have been a goddamn Pixar movie. This should have been maybe like this could have been like an animated Pixar movie, maybe. The whole, like, Cars and, the whole racing thing, like, that all could have worked in another movie that's not Cars. Like, the first, like, you're telling me all this takes place in the same universe as Cars 1? Like, really? Really? Like, and just the dynamic between Lightning and Mater, the entire movie, it's just so, like, just so one-sided. Like, I really, like, Lightning kind of becomes a douchebag again. Mater is just stupid the entire time, doesn't really know what he's doing. Just, it's just this whole, like, it's just a mess of a movie, in my opinion. And that's where we transition into Cars 3, where Cars 3, there is no mention of Cars 2 at all. No, like, hey, remember this? No. No, like, subtle, like, plot hints, no nothing. Mater is in it for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, if that. His biggest role is when he gives advice to Lightning on reaching out to Smokey, and obviously, that gives Lightning his group back and allows Lightning to, train, and then realize Cruz. He does, like, kind of have a big-ish role. No, he doesn't. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. No, he doesn't. So, anyways, I think that Cars 3 is obviously, you could go from Cars 1 to Cars 3, no problem. And obviously, Cars 2, they give a little bit of, like, plot. They're like, oh, he's won this many Piston Cups, Doc's passed away. That's really all you miss. But, like, I feel like once you get into it in Cars 3, you're like, oh, like, you can totally understand, like, what's going on. What the dynamic is with Lightning and Doc and what's going on in the world. And with all his friends retiring around him, like, there's all those different things that you're like, okay, yeah, I can totally understand what's going on. So that leads us into Cars on the Road, which I know, I didn't talk about Cars Tunes or Radiator Springs 500, but Cars on the Road, honestly, for me, was just, obviously, with how many different kinds of cars they use and the different, just redesigning different models and putting them in, it obviously was just used for toys, let's be honest. And obviously that was 5 years ago. It's a good, just, like, you watch it, each episode's maybe 10 minutes, nothing too crazy, no Wall-E-esque, I guess you could say, like, plot, talk or anything, like, or not plot talk, but, like, plot, complexity or any of these, like, story arcs. It's just Lightning and Mater go on this road trip to his sister's wedding. They get all these wacky adventures. Boom, you're at the wedding, and then, you see Cruz there, and they implement at the end that Cruz kind of went off and did her own thing. Is like, Lightning doesn't really have anything to do with her or with racing anymore, and obviously that's a little sad because, like, at the end of Cars 3, they really show they're like, no, like, he's her new mentor, like, he's her Doc Hudson, and she wears 51 to not only commemorate him but to honor him. And I mean, knowing that in universe now is a little soul crushing, but at the end of the day, we're not the ones making the stories, and obviously I always see every year, talks of a Cars 4 coming around. There's the skit on SNL about Cars 4. There's talk of it. Obviously, there always will be, just because it's a successful film trilogy. Obviously, 2 out of the 3 movies are bangers, in my opinion, and obviously, the toys generate millions of dollars, and honestly, I have the number here. It's $8 billion since 2006. So over a 20-year span, Pixar, Mattel, and all these different toy companies have generated over $8 billion just purely based on just releasing toys. And obviously, as I said again, I'm going to say it again. Cars on the Road, I think, was just strictly made to make toys and to generate money. And obviously, as I said, the Goofy Adventures thing is obviously, it's a good arc, or not arc, but story. It's funny, it's whatever. Owen Wilson, Larry the Cable Guy. Mater sounds like he's 70 which because Larry the Cable Guy is 70, so it's a little hard. You're like, oh, his voice is just cracking a little bit, but I think that, you know, just the entire, show, it's good. It's a good show. It's not, you're not supposed to take it serious. You're not supposed to over analyze it. You're not supposed to over talk about it. It's literally just a 9-episode short show, literally an hour and a half of your time to just watch Lightning and Mater go on an adventure. Now, as we head into, uncharted territory, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. Now we head into the Planes movies. Yeah, I know. Some people don't know this. So, Planes movies take place in the same universe as Cars movies. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, I'm not okay. I'm being stupid. Obviously, it's pretty obvious. It's the Cars universe. It's, quite literally, racing plane wants to be a racer, has a mentor person, has his goofy sidekick, and then blah 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 blah, and wins it all, beats the cocky douchebag at the end. It's whatever. Kind of the same ish plot as the first Cars movie, but just done a little bit differently. And honestly, I like it. Obviously, Rotten Tomatoes did not. A 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. It is Dane Cook as the star as Dusty Cropper. I mean, it's a little ridiculous, but Planes 2, not ridiculous at all. Planes 2 honestly or Planes Fire and Rescue, we're just going to call it Planes 2, has one of the weirdest, I think, story, plot things of all time. I mean, so Dusty now is a world racing champion, and for planes too, not even for cars. He's a plane world racing champion, and so now his hometown, Crop Junction, their fire truck, he can't be a firefighter anymore or a certification, so they have to close down the runways and for the Corn Fest that's gonna happen. So Dusty goes to Piston Peak and gets his firefighter certification. It's a little wacky. Like, why couldn't they just call another firefighter to be like, hey, can you come be our firefighter here for a little bit till we find a replacement or something? Like, it's whatever. And obviously, the plot it's a good movie. 44% of Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, better than Cars 2. Cars 2 at 40%. So, I mean, obviously, if I'm going to pick one of the Planes movies, I'm going to pick Planes 2. I'm not going to lie. I like this. I love this movie a lot more than I love the first one. Like, I love the first movie. I don't really like the second one. Or no, I like the second one. Oh my goodness. Cars 1, I like Cars 1. I don't like Cars 2. And, Planes 2 for me, obviously, it's, I remember going to the Disney store at my mall, and when people still went to the mall, and getting I still have it, and it's like a limited edition, Dusty Cropper as a plane, or as the firefighter plane. It's like he has his own box you put him in. It says like Planes Fire and Rescue on top. It's like him flying over. It's awesome now. And as someone who, I think, I don't know, it's just Planes 2 for me is just such a movie. And obviously the Yellowstone, it's pretty much just Yellowstone, obviously. If you've ever been to Yellowstone, and the geysers there, and obviously the lodge that everyone stays in. It's a real just like copy and paste of Yellowstone. And honestly, my favorite scene from any of these movies is right when the fire, I guess, jumps the road and they come and save everyone. That's one of my favorite scenes in all Pixar. And then obviously, the Planes movies, they are Pixar. So they are actually made by the Disney Toon Studios, which is the same studios who made the Cars Toons and Radiator Springs 500. And the Cars on the Road series was actually made in-house by Pixar. But the Planes movies, Planes 1 and 2, were both made by the Toons studio. I could be wrong on that Cars on the Road fact, but I'm pretty sure they were made by that. So, this movie, obviously, Planes 2, it's a good movie. It's not as good as Cars 1. You know, it's not going to be something that blows your shoes off. But for me, as someone, as we're talking about the Cars universe, you know, this is a good movie. You know, this came out right before Cars 3, and I enjoy it. I still enjoy it. You know, as I said, as an older person, you know, I still will sit down and be like, yeah, fuck it. Let's watch Planes Fly and Rescue, man. Like, I'm in. It's an hour and 26 minutes. You know, it's an hour and a half of my time, and I'm not gonna, you know, once the movie gets over, I'm not gonna be like, oh, this movie sucked. You know, I'm not gonna sit here and say that to whoever I'm watching with. I'm gonna, you know, sit there and be like, yeah, it's a good movie. Like, I'm not gonna get mad at the fact that, you know, some of the, you know, I mean, there's nothing to even get mad over. It's just an hour and a half movie about a plane becoming a firefighter. So now we're kind of in the area of just, you know, talking about the movies, you know. So we're going to start with Cars 1. Cars 1, obviously, you know, there's nothing really to complain about for me. You know, I love this movie start to finish. You know, I could probably almost go bar for bar, line for line, if I really wanted to. I've probably seen this movie a gazillion times, I'm going to be honest. And for me, you know, it's just the rewatchability for Cars 1 is just immaculate. It's great. Like, it's so good and it's so easy and rewatchable for me, in my opinion. You know, the fact that, you know, 20 years after, 20 years after it came out, I can still sit here and say, like, yeah, like, let's watch Cars, you know. Obviously, all the new stuff Pixar is putting out is not as, well, I mean, to be honest, not as good as, you know, the early 2000s, 2010, you know, honestly, early 2000s, 2010s run. You know, besides, you know, a couple 2010s movies, you know, they were on a run, you know, and Cars, for me, you know, becoming, you know, obviously, I would always get to, you know, get whatever car was out, you know, whatever diecast was out, you know. I used to, you know, I remember driving and playing with them on my car mat when I was, like, 2 years old, like, just very, like, little snippets in my head about this, what do you call it, this memory. So, I mean, I think that the biggest thing for me is the rewatchability for Cars 1, and for me, obviously, it's an A+. I mean, this movie, in my opinion, is the best out of anything that's been put out in universe. You know, this is before Disney was just putting out sequels to put out for the sake of it. And this is still a movie where I'm, like, gonna show my kids one day and be like, you know, I grew up on the Disney Pixar side of things, you know, the Pixar movies, you know, the Disney movies. You know, I mean, honestly, yeah, Disney princesses, you know, as weird as that to say, you know, it's what I grew up on, and it's something that I think I will always remember for the rest of my life. You know, obviously, as I said, you know, I'm going to show my kids, you know, cars. I'm going to show them my collection. You know, I remember, you know, always asking my parents, you know, oh, let me can I get one car while we're at Target? And looking back at it, I'm like, damn, I was annoying as hell. But now you know, I see the car sections at Walmart, at Target. You know, it's kind of, you know, it's dead. You know, there's not really anything new being put out. There's also not anything old being put out. You know, everything you see is just there. You know, I remember when Cars 3 came out and the there was these massive displays. You know, there'd be pretty much like, I mean, you walk in, obviously, and there's two, shelves, and one of the shelves, you know, the entire thing would just be cars, you know. And now it's a very small, select area is cars, and some of the stuff you're like, damn, like, what the hell happened, you know? And that's something I don't think, you know, Pixar is ever going to be able to recreate, you know, obviously without someone like John Lasseter leading the charge, they're not going to be able to create this massive, you know, like, toy hype. You know, I remember you watch these videos that would follow someone looking for a diecast. You know, I remember, like, when the Rusty's Lightning McQueen, like when he has this really shiny wrap in the third movie, and when that die cast came out, that was like a pot of gold. Like no one could find it. You know, you had to look and look and look until, you know, finally they started putting them out. So, anyways, I got a little off topic there, but that's Cars 1, I guess. And we'll talk a little bit more about the die casts here in a little bit once we get to Cars 3. But Cars 2, oh man, this is going to be a... This is going to be the longest section, probably. Cars 2, I mean, where do I even begin? I mean, this movie is just plain out garbage. And as I've said multiple times during this episode, like, I like the Cars movies. I love the Cars movies. I love everything about them. But Cars 2 for me is just a movie where I can't watch it. You know, I don't want to watch it, you know. And obviously, you know, they saw the success of the Cars 2 and they're like, hey, let's give Mater a whole movie. Let's get rid of everything we just built in Cars 1. Because, honestly, the World's Grand Prix as a standalone plot could have worked for a Cars sequel. Like, why did they add all this oil conspiracy and all these different elements, and Mater's a spy, and then Finn missile, Holly shifts. I mean, they had to add all these different elements into it, and then obviously, you know, Lightning and Mater have a falling out, and then Mater is sad, and then obviously it's just so much going on, and I think that this movie, obviously, it just, I mean, as I said earlier in this episode too, like, the plot of, like, an oil conspiracy thing could have worked in any other movie, maybe a Pixar movie, if they do it right, but not a Cars movie. You know, you can add racing, like, add, you know, F1 or NASCAR into it, like, who cares? You know? You can add that kind of, you know, racing and thought processing into, you know, that movie. You know, not a Cars movie. You know, in Cars 2, for me, obviously, just the jokes aren't funny. The plot isn't entertaining. You know, all these different things you have to go to. You know, Lightning being kind of an idiot the whole time, and then Mater being an idiot, and then actually being a genius. That whole plot line. I mean, and then, you know, Finn and Holly, like, they can't just see through that Mater's not a spy. Like, why does Mater keep up with this whole spy facade the entire time? Why does he think Holly's his girlfriend? Like, there's just so many different things, and obviously the critics hated it. You know, 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, one of the lowest Pixar movies of all time. And I mean, this is just so, like, shocking, because, you know, Cars 1 is this I don't say revolutionary, but, like, this really good movie, and then they're like, let's put out all these different, you know, things about Mater, let's put all these different things about, you know, what, you know, or, like, the Cars tunes, and, like, doing that, and then they're like, we're gonna give it a whole movie. You know, we're gonna shift away from everything. So Cars 2 for me is just one of those movies where I can watch it, but, you know, the whole time I'm gonna sit there and be like, yeah, this is just not it. You know, if I'm gonna pick any Cars movie or Pixar movie, I am not ever gonna pick Cars 2. Never gonna pick it. So that's led us right on in to Cars 3, which Cars 3 for me, for a while, I thought Cars 3 was better than Cars 1. You know, I remember this is the most hyped I've ever been. You know, this, and I think probably Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. You know, were the two most movies where I'm like, let's go. You know, let's go. I'm so excited to go see this. Let's do it. Whatever. You know, I remember, you know, leading up to it, like, I was watching the diecast videos. I was collecting the diecast. I was doing all these different things. You know, I was literally like, and then I remember when they dropped that first trailer and Lightning and McQueen crashed. Oh my god, bro. Like, I remember sitting there and I'm like, oh, like, that was honestly probably one of the best one of their teaser trailers they've ever dropped. You know, Pixar cooked with that. You don't really know what's going on. You just get dropped in, and you're like, oh shit, lightning's crashing. But then in the movie, like, honestly, they just did it so well, that, like, he would be depressed. He would not want to leave, he would not want to go back to racing, And obviously, I think it'd be a little bit more than his wife or girlfriend, telling him, like, hey, like, you should go do this. Like, it would take probably a little bit more than that, in my opinion. Then, and I think that the biggest thing, and it's just like the biggest lesson you take away is like accepting your role and accepting your age. People move on. You gotta move on. You gotta accept your reality, and you gotta move on. And obviously, I as much as I will praise this movie does have its flaws. The Cruz Ramirez, replacing him, that was a little bit shaky. I'm not fully on board, even, we're talking 9 years after it's released. I'm still a little shaky on that. But I think that they did such a good job of just wrapping up the Cars story, and obviously there's still many stories to tell, obviously his life, they could tell, his life, Cars 2 to Cars 3, those 6 years, like what he was up to. But as, we're almost 10 years post Cars 3, and obviously outside of, Cars on the Road, we haven't gotten anything in the last, 10 years. We got Cars on the Road 5 years ago, and that very may well be the last Cars project we ever get. And obviously they still have Cars Land and Disney's California Adventure. I don't know if they have it at Disney Tokyo or Disney Paris, or if they have it, I don't think they have it at Disney World either. If they do, I'm so sorry for my mistake. I don't believe they do. But obviously, they added another ride. They added the Luigi ride, and which is fun. It's a good ride. I went on it last time, but obviously it's purely, honestly, made for kids, and we didn't realize that when we were online. And then we got on the ride, and we were like, oh, okay, we're doing this. It was 3 of us, so we all squeezed onto one. So, but at the end of the day, the Cars universe, there's so many different movies, shows, and all the Cars tunes, and once again, as much as I sing their praises, the Cars toys, at that side of it, I remember the hype, the hype for all these toys, and the Cars tunes, Cars on the Road, all these different cars, it was all just for money. There's nothing that I think Disney or Pixar had in mind, other than money when they're putting out all these different things. Obviously, Cars 3 was a good story. It wrapped everything up, pretty much tied a lot of loose ends. And, it's not a Toy Story-esque, I guess, trilogy of, like, just wrapping everything up and there's not any more story to tell. Obviously, in my opinion, we're talking about Toy Story for a little bit here. Toy Story should have been after the third one. Toy Story 4 and 5 will not exist, in my opinion. But, anyways, Cars for me is something that I pretty much latched onto from, I don't even know, probably when I was like 3 or 4 maybe. The movie came out before I was even born. So, like, this movie for me and this universe for me has really grown with me. I still have all my old, diecasts, all my ones from when I was a kid, and then obviously Cars 3, I had a ton, and I kept in a separate box, because I'm like, these are mine, no one's ever going to touch these are special to me. I remember I got the Apple car on eBay, which who even knows how much that is nowadays. And I still know there's people that go out and they look for cars, and I'm not judging them, that's their life, that's their lifestyle, but I think that, it's a dying, I guess, franchise, and I think that Pixar they need to release something soon. You still have Owen Wilson, you still have Larry the Cable Guy, you still have the voices, and maybe, like, do Cars 4 takes place between Cars 2 and Cars 3. There you go. Plot right there. Just tell a good racing story. None of this passing the torch stuff. None of that. Just give us a good old, just Cars 1-esque story. Not the exact same, obviously, but just a good story about racing. None of these old other factors that come into it, retirement, spies, and oil conspiracies and becoming a firefighter. None of that. And Pixar for me, obviously, without, the creative heads where they were, and with them not wanting to make, close personal tales to directors anymore, and just purely want to tell, stories and not personal. Obviously, their newest one, Elio. I mean, honestly, where does that fit in the Pixar theory? So, anyways, thank you guys for listening. This is Hollo Podcast, and we're signing off for the night. So you guys have a good rest of your night, and tune in next week for another episode. Peace.